And why don't I actually, Bobby Garza is part of the REVS national leadership team out of Austin, Texas, and has been very active in helping build out the Austin pilot. Welcome to the program. And it's, look, I mean, what do we say? So, just for those, again, I think everybody who watches this program is well aware of the REVS program. For those of you who don't know what it is, again, this is the initiative that we launched on May 6th, which now has 11 pilot cities across the United States. The intent of the REVS program is not to push for opening prematurely. The idea is to say, how do we get local music communities, public health departments, cities, counties, regions on the same page with musicians and venue employees and audiences to say that collectively we want to reopen this safely and as quickly as we can, and make sure that everybody really knows what the deal is and what that means and why it's safe and it's okay to come back, into live music. And, Bobby, you've been working with a lot of our pilots, particularly the group in Austin. I mean, what would you like to share today? What's your read on how things are going?
I mean, I think that, I think we're making progress in a way that's maybe a little bit different from some other cities. Austin has a pretty long history of advocacy, and organizations that are here have been longstanding. So, in some ways, Austin has a good base from which to draw, which means, we don't have to go hunting around to look for leaders in the music industry to talk to them about what the best things might be. Those conversations are a bit streamlined, so that's good. I will say that, just like every other city is encountering, we know that cities generally aren't nimble in terms of how they respond to policy issues or challenges. So, in the environment that we live in right now, where it probably requires us to be 100% nimble, we're finding we need to be a little bit more flexible in working with cities and just sort of understanding what bureaucracies are faced with right now. And I think the reality is that we know at least, Austin is focused on pandemic writ large, not necessarily how venues are thinking about reopening. So we've kind of pivoted a little bit and said, so let's have a conversation with venues about what they need. And that's kind of where we started, which is to say, how can the REVS program be of service to, venue owners generally? And where we kind of landed was, we're not worried so much about guidelines so much as we are about understanding what's happening all over the world from an idea perspective, right? So the ideations, go from, 70-page reports to, 30-page reports. And sometimes that voluminous information can be overwhelming for, folks that are trying to figure out how to keep the lights on. So what we worked with the city on was to say, our positioning ought to be, this compendium of best practices that has some layers of analysis applied to it that can help venue owners get through it quicker. So we're in the process of, finishing out that analysis and then working with the city to figure out the best way in which we partner with them, understanding that, the city has a level of institutional challenges to get things approved in a quick way. But also, understanding that this is the first step in a process that will probably take a long time. And I think the reality is that we know that, the live music scene probably won't be the same for 24 months, if we're lucky. And that's depending on whenever we actually get to have shows again. So, how can we best prepare venues for when that does happen in that eventuality?
Yeah, and Alex, if you could put in the chat, there's an article I think we've referenced previously, just an analysis of the kind of shocking vulnerability of Austin venues and a projection that potentially 90% of Austin venues may be vulnerable to go out of business by Halloween if there's not significant change, including that could be public support, that could be a lot of different things happening, but if things go the way they're going, it just, it's just a house of cards. And, one of the things that I think is interesting and very admirable about the Austin community is there's a real sort of track record of, organizations that have been able to come together and basically say, okay, how do we recognize who the different stakeholders are in our community and how do we come to the table so it's not totally discordant, right? So there's a little bit of sort of history and a little bit of trust in terms of trying to figure out what is sort of going to be the way to sort of synthesize everybody's agenda. So again, we heard from Cody Cowan with the Red River Cultural District earlier this year. And could you speak to, again, thinking about all of the people participating, today who are not in a REV city, what is like the role of like a Red River Cultural District in terms of being able to be a place where a lot of people can come together and share ideas and develop a common agenda that then can be taken to the city or taken, elsewhere?
I think for some, organizations that are nonprofits and decide that they want to be, an advocate for this particular industry, the biggest utility that you can provide is to be an aggregator and a synthesizer, right? So if you are a content expert on some of these things, how can you help other people with the translation? We started a lot of our efforts with, changing what happened in the Austin music industry way back in like 2008 with the Live Music Task Force, and Don Pitts, that's part of our Music Cities Together stuff, and myself were both on that task force. And, we learned a lot way back then from what we did wrong. So, I think the short version of that is if you want to provide really solid advocacy, the first thing is to, figure out how to learn from your mistakes, but also have a little bit of tenacity with respect to that. I think that, in the culture that we live in and the times that we live in, people think that 140 characters does something for your level of advocacy. And I think the reality that we know is that the vision that we set out in 2008 with the Live Music Task Force that we thought was pretty pristine still hasn't really been accomplished. And it's changed since then, right? So, that's over a decade's worth of conversations that are still worthy and still need to be had, right? Like they're all valuable, but, these things, they don't change fast and they don't change overnight. And, even with the overlay of like some of the pandemic stuff that's going on, I think that we have to figure out how to make sure that we have some measured gains and that we can celebrate those wins and make sure that as a community, we understand that these are incremental, but also highly valuable to maintaining a level of success and also a level of drive that's going to get something done.
Yeah, I really love the way you put that. And I think that's something we've been really, again, going back to, the core ideas behind the REVS initiative is in kind of a moment of overwhelming, kind of comprehensive grief and loss, what do we have control over and what can we do? Again, and I really want to hold up what you say about, sort of the tweet as a proxy for action. There's a difference between strategy and catharsis. And that doesn't mean that that everybody's human beings want to feel like, we can shout at the moon or do whatever it is that we feel like we are called to do it at a given moment. But if you can, peel off the incremental steps that you can take, not only does that feel like progress, but it is progress. And
right.
And I think, again, what's really exciting for us, I think, as national team leaders on the REVS initiative, we're going to be able to swing into the next phase of this, which again is not about the 11 pilots. It's about trying to translate and share that information with everybody else. So we have a bunch of people today participating in the meeting from Pittsburgh. And I can't wait for our Pittsburgh crew to get together and say, what can they learn from what's happening in Austin and Seattle and all these other communities, things like that. So, hopefully, when all things are said and done with the REVS initiative, people really feel like there's something meaningful that they could then translate, which may not be the specific timeline around the reopening of venues. It may be a process. It may be a way of talking with local government. It may be, in Louisville, this is the first time that venues are really working together in concert, with restaurants to say, all right, how do we speak with united voice and things like that? So,
and isn't that a huge win? I think that, organizing the conversations to be had and having those very like wide-eyed, open-eared conversations to talk about shared challenges and struggles. And I think, Michael, you'll know it better than everybody, but one of the challenges that we've seen with some of the pilot cities is that there's in Austin or Seattle, there might be a well-developed, form of advocacy, but then in other cities, the known starting point for some of these things is completely, a mystery. So, I hope that, what we can do here in Austin can not necessarily be like, here's where you start, but like, here's what we tried.
Yeah.
And we can start having those shared conversations with other cities that are really trying to jumpstart some of this stuff and provide a little bit of a narrative, because I don't pretend that whatever we've done here is 100% right. And that, the things that we learn from our missteps are going to be as valuable as whatever our successes are. So, I mean, I think this initial step in getting these pilot cities together and start talking about it is like very much like step 1A. And step 1B is like that reflection that we can then share with everybody else to kind of get people going on, where they want to go. And I think the reality is that the solutions will be crafted and different, and they ought to be different for each individual city. I don't think there's a template because we don't know what we're doing right now in the middle of all of this crazy business,
Yeah, no, I think that's so right. And that really was a big part of the project design, is that this is not a prescriptive top-down, we're going to tell people what to do. This is really meant to be, let's try to seed a lot of different models in a lot of different types of cities across the country and see what organically fits and what works, given their particular dynamics.